When did making plans get this complicated? It's time to streamline with WhatsApp, the secure messaging app that brings the whole group together. Use polls to settle dinner plans. Send event invites and pin messages so no one forgets Mom's 60th. And never miss a meme or milestone. All protected with end-to-end encryption. It's time for WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone. Learn more at whatsapp.com.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. From the creator of Homeland, Claire Danes and Matthew Rhys star in the new Netflix series The Beast in Me, as ruthless rivals whose shared darkness will set them on a collision course with fatal consequences. The Beast in Me is a riveting psychological cat and mouse story about guilt, justice, and doubt. You will not want to miss this. The Beast in Me launches November 13th, only on Netflix.
If Bunns could give one piece of advice to a kid who feels like the bad omen in their own warren, whether it's because they look different, they think differently, or just don't fit the mold, what do you think Bunns would say to them?
I think Bunns would ask you to be true to yourself, and that she would remind you that everyone feels that way, and that's what she recognizes. And there isn't a single character in the story she might point out that doesn't feel this way, that doesn't feel a little different, and either is overprotective about that difference or overcompensating, or it's a very human feeling, and we can all be empathetic to one another knowing that. I think Bunns would lean on that and be really supportive, and probably snuggle up in you and do some very cute bunny stuff at the same time.
Gosh, I'm such a crier, so you're making my eyes water. Hey everyone, I'm Bianca Schulze, founder of the Children's Book Review, and this is the Growing Readers Podcast. Today, I am beyond excited to bring you a conversation with someone whose work has touched millions. Alan Barillaro is the Academy Award-winning writer and director of the animated short film Piper. You know, that breathtaking 6-minute film about the baby sandpiper learning to face the waves. He's also been the supervising animator on some of Pixar's most beloved films, including WALL-E, The Incredibles, Incredibles 2, and Brave. After 25 years at Pixar Animation Studios, Alan has now brought his storytelling magic to the page with his second middle grade novel, Bunns Rabbit, a beautifully illustrated story about a short-eared rabbit who becomes known as the Bad Omen Bunny. What makes this conversation so special is Alan's remarkable honesty about the creative process. Despite his incredible achievements, including recognition from the House Commons of Canada and multiple industry awards, he admits he never feels up to the task. And it's precisely that vulnerability, combined with his willingness to stay intentionally uncomfortable, that makes his work so extraordinary. So settle in as we talk about 10-year creative journeys, the courage it takes to switch from wearing an animation hat for the vulnerability of the written word, and why being different is often the beginning of something extraordinary. Before we dive in, here's the synopsis for Bunns Rabbit. For anyone who has ever felt different, Academy Award winner Alan Barillaro tells the deeply moving tale of a brave rabbit who sets out on a quest to save her home and family, no matter what it takes. When Bunns is born with small but perfectly functional rabbit ears, the warren is abuzz. Surely such short ears spell bad luck for the community. Sheltered in her family's burrow, Bunns listens to the rhythm of her mother's heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. A song of home and belonging. Her father explains that unlike a rabbit's words of thumping feet, a heartsong cannot lie. But the unknown world of the meadow, the sounds and smells above, call to Bunns. When at last she's ready to brave the staring and whispering of neighbors who fear her because she's different, and the disapproving elders who threaten to banish her family, she finds a world beyond the warren, where myths and riddles, magic voyages, and important new friends await. Can the Bad Omen Bunny follow her own heart song to a destiny? A wish meant just for her? Academy Award-winning director, writer, and animator Alan Barillaro's graceful storytelling, warm illustrations, and dramatic graphic panels weave light and dark into a seamless tapestry to enchant children and adults alike. Hi, Alan. Welcome to the Growing Readers podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. You know, your background, I think it's so exciting for our listeners. I think we've had so many authors and so many illustrators, and we've definitely had one animator, Molly Idle. She's a children's book creator and she did animation as well. And so I just think having you as such a different voice in terms of your background on the show is going to be fun to dig into.
Thank you.
I want to kind of start with one of my signature questions, which I always give my first-time guests, and that is, to be a writer, they say you need to be a reader first. So was there a pivotal moment in which you considered yourself a reader?
It's funny, I struggled as a reader, as a young reader to start with. I actually am so left-handed and a little dyslexic that I learned in grade 1 to read the opposite way. And I was very stubborn, saying, this is how I read. I go backwards and I go forward. So I always felt a little bit on the back foot of reading, but then I loved it. And I would say there was a pivotal moment, probably in grade 4 or 5, where a teacher said, you get to make a book report on any book you like, not just the book in class. And I loved Roald Dahl's The Witches. And that was a pivotal moment for me, because that was a moment where I felt I really had to do the book justice and look at and who's this author and who's this illustrator, Quentin Blake, who draws these really funny hands. It became a different perspective of looking at a story of someone construct this, which sounds very simple to say, but it was that awakening of like, wait, someone made this and they do this for a living. And is that a thing? Can you do that? And I was obsessed at that moment of, I think I can still draw Quentin Blake, like I just copied like most when they started. There's even a Quentin Blake over my desk here that's of The Witches. That was just very pivotal for me, of that moment of falling in love with reading and the idea of storytelling, that your imagination can just go to these places and take you along for the ride, just felt unbelievable to me.
I'm such a Roald Dahl fan as well. I grew up in Australia, and I mean, he was just so popular when I was a kid. I have to ask, did you read his revolting rhymes?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a story I haven't read of his. I kind of do these deep dives when I fall in love with an author, where I not only want to read what they've written, I want to know what inspired them. And then they reference a different book, and then I want to know that artist and then his drawings in World War II, and the idea that he goes and eats candy. He has a little candy bowl, his routine. It just becomes this, it leads me to all different artists and books and influences of Quentin. What about Quentin Blake? Who's influencing him? What's this magazine called Punch? It's this tree web that all starts from the one story, including revolting rhymes of, can I go back to the original? What were the originals? Grimm, Grimm, especially when it's like a Grimm story where you're like, actually, it's been quite changed over the years. So I don't know. I love the digging of that. And then revolting rhymes. There's so many good drawings.
Well, if you haven't read, his granddaughter, Sophie Dahl, has the picture book series, Madame Badoobada. And I mean, I just love the essence of those books too. They're weird and quirky and spot on.
Yeah, and really honest. I think that's what struck me with Roald Dahl, as far as his the not talking down to the reader. It was one of those first lessons, whether I'm in film or when I'm working on animation or books, kind of treating your reader as sharp and really and not talking down to them. I felt like Roald Dahl always spoke to me like you would speak to an adult, and you just went, oh, the honesty, and there's like some truth to what he's saying, or cruelty. Like he has all these little sides of him that as a young reader I found just really attractive. Like, why is this guy talking like this? This is amazing. And the characters, of course, I was sure there was witches around me after reading that book, and I'm studying everybody very differently.
Yeah.
Why is she wearing gloves? This was like to cover her. The imagination takes off, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've spent over 25 years bringing animated characters to life at Pixar and also amazingly won an Academy Award for Piper, which I have to say is my favorite animated short.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yet ahead of our conversation today, we emailed and you mentioned that you never feel up to the task as a writer, illustrator, animator, or director. And so that's so surprising coming from someone with your resume. So can you take us into what that voice sounds like when you're sitting down with just a blank page and a pencil or maybe a stylus, no team, no rendering software, just you and Bunns Rabbit?
Well, if I'm taking myself to that moment with my sketchbook, I'm usually not even drawing on the first page because I don't like the stress of it, of this thing I'm going to create. I draw with pen and a soft notebook, partly because I don't want to erase and I don't want to get precious. So I try to talk myself into much considering storytelling more like, and it's a strange analogy, but like a garden. When you throw the seeds in and you don't know which tomato plant's going to grow up. I remember my grandparents would kind of just throw all the pulp and which idea, they all just growing and there's no emphasis on which one's important yet. And then they quickly, my grandmother just pull out all the little plants that weren't really growing and what are the strong ones? And you kind of see what comes out of that. And that's how I approach it. The insecure side of me, I think from animators are very much like actors. We are the actors sometimes in a scene. Think of like Wally or Piper. You're having to play the whole scene. And there's always a certain amount of vulnerability you have to kind of put yourself in. And I love that about writing. I actually found it extremely vulnerable, like hold on to your seat vulnerable. You're really going to just start the story and it's going to be your voice, not a collection. As an animator, you get to hide behind a monster and say, that's not me. That's not me on stage. And that gave me a really nice security blanket, but also slowly gave me confidence to become a writer and say, well, I'm a little bit more exposed here. How does that feel? I think it's brave to kind of try to tell your story and just put it out there. And for everybody who's trying, you have to kind of build yourself up a little bit in your confidence, or at least I feel I have to do. There's a thing with acting where you say you're as good as your last scene or your shot. This feeling that we're all having to try and just put yourself out there and be vulnerable. And you want to be around people that appreciate that and support that. And then you kind of gain your confidence through them. And if that makes sense. But I don't come to a project feeling I can illustrate it. Even Where the Water Takes Us, my first novel, the editor convinced me to make it a novel. I pitched it as a graphic novel because I was too scared to tackle the prose. And, so she had confidence in me. Same with Piper. I did not have confidence to make that film on my own. It was some people at Pixar, especially Andrew Stanton and Lindsay Collins, who were making Finding Dory at the time that said, we think this could be a short film. So there's always those people in your life that I really appreciate that support you in the right way. They don't just put it on the fridge and say, that's great. You're wonderful. Gold star. They kind of look at it differently and go, I see what you're doing. This is where it worked. This is where it didn't work for me. And that to me is the key. I kind of come alive in those moments as far as the excitement for doing something.
Well, let's talk about Bunns. Bunns is born with short ears and becomes what's known as the bad omen bunny. So in animation, you've created characters loved by millions, but what made you want to tell the story of a character that her own community fears and wants to banish?
It comes from that sense of, if you can boil it down to a word, it was belonging. And where do you belong in the world in that age? Where do I fit in around me? And especially as you grow up and you leave, your meadow, or your little school or your family. How do you step out into that world? There's those concepts. And then there's also the side of me that's just admitting I don't look very far from my backyard. And for inspiration, Piper from my short Pixar is, the sandpipers I see on the beach each day that give me an idea, and I see a character, and the rabbits that are born in our backyard that my daughter loves, and we would tell a story as we walk to school every day. They just start to form. And I don't know where that comes from other than just a deep curiosity. And then a story being implied on that of what is this relationship? What does she do in the world, this rabbit? And it kind of spirals out of control in my imagination, where I have these sketchbooks where, here's one here where I know it's a podcast, but there's a lot of scribbles of ink drawings that I keep in baseball games and practices. And I'm just kind of thinking as I'm going. So Bunns becomes this story that's took me 10 years to write. So it just got bigger and bigger. And I was even writing the second book at the same time because I felt that that was really necessary to what this book first sets up in the series.
Well, you write in this story for Bunns a lot about the heartsong. So this idea that unlike words or thumping feet, a heartsong cannot lie. So where did that concept come from?
You're going to make me admit my strange logic and imagination of a rabbit thumping is a language, right? This beat and how similar that is to a thumping heart. And what if there was this character that rabbits are these sensitive creatures that if they got close enough, they could feel this song, this heart song that was this truth of how someone's really feeling. So you don't really believe that it can't lie. So I might be saying to you something that I'm not scared, but you go, I can feel in your heart that you're a little nervous right now in this interview. I can feel your heart song. And what if Bunns has this special gift and what that means? And it comes from a place of, in a divisive world of these characters, an unlikely hero that can see the true intentions of people and maybe what's hidden behind some bravado of a deer you run into or someone's fear that might be blocking them from being more empathetic with each other. So it just felt really right to me. Tracking that logic, feel free to laugh and judge.
Well, I'll laugh, but I'll never judge. You can't see inside my mind. Well, I have to imagine that there's something pretty personal for you about creating a character who listens to her mother's heartbeat for comfort. You're a parent and you're creating this story knowing that it's for parents and kids to enjoy together. So what were you trying to give both generations with this story? Or maybe you weren't trying, maybe you realized after the fact it gives something to both generations.
Yeah, it's usually selfishly. I mean, I probably can go back to a rule from Pixar and not take credit for any of this, which is especially early on in the days of those movies, we talk a lot about making it very specific and personal to your own family. And if your family loves it and really identifies with it, the odds are maybe another family will connect with it. So you're not looking at it in a marketing sense, but much more like, this is what deeply I feel like I'm writing this book for my kids. At the time I start this book, my twins are 8, my daughter's 10, 3 totally different types of readers. One's, off reading chapter books. The other one, only graphic novels. The other one would rather not read at all and cuddle. And bedtime reading is important to us. So what's the story that could pull them together? And you can see even just in that first scene with the mom, I'm thinking of that and the closeness of reading to your kids and what book. I would love this book intentionally. So I was trying to create this bridge between picture books and a chapter book where you're just going, I didn't want my kids to just jump to graphic novels as much as I loved it. So this is my plea to say, all readers, I promise you can handle a little more prose and you're going to love it. And the biggest compliment would be that they read Bunns Rabbit and say, look how thick it was. I'm going to go read this chapter book next. Because I remember those moments as a kid where it felt daunting to say, I want to read that book, but I'm a little nervous. That's a lot of words. So it came, I like to have this kind of practical side in my mind of, what's out there that's not on the shelves for my family. And then this other side of all these themes and things I'm worrying about as a parent. Even Piper, my film, I always say, I wish I was the mom in that story. That's the parent I want to be. It's my own anxieties of letting your kids grow up and not hover over them and how important it is. So it just naturally gets tied to those things. But I was saying, I want this story for my kids. I want to be able to read that. This is the story I want to read to them at bedtime or hand over to them if they're nervous about that transition. They're always lofty goals and they make me a little nervous to kind of admit them out loud. But I feel like even if it's a great place to start and kicks off the adventure of writing a book.
Yeah, I do love that. I used to be a bookseller and so many parents would come in and say, I really would love it if my kids could enjoy reading, but they didn't want to make that leap from a thinner book to a thicker book, right? And at the time, so it was around 2008, a beautiful book had just come out, which was called The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. And it went on to win the Caldecott. It also became that gorgeous movie that got nominated. And anyway, incredible. But that book too is so thick because of the illustrations. And I would say, oh, here's the book you need. And the parents would look at me like, you're crazy. That's the opposite of what I'm asking for. And I know, open it up, look inside, look at this up artwork, it carries part of the story and it's the bridge that you're looking for. And then they would come back in and say, oh my gosh, they could not put it down. So just you sharing that, this is what parents are looking for and finding that bridge between picture books and a love of reading. We lose so many readers in this stage because they don't want to just stare at the words on the pages, but Bunns Rabbit is that bridge. So you've done an amazing job.
Thank you. After a 10-year journey, it's one of those moments where you really have to bet on it. And I really appreciated Candlewick being behind me. It's a big ask to say, can I make this with hundreds of illustrations? By the way, we're going to be editing the words and the pictures simultaneously, instead of a locked manuscript. I really felt like that play has to be between language, the prose and images. I never love a story where someone reads a paragraph and explains the meadow, and then you have a drawing that shows the meadow all over again. And you're like, you want to balance these things and have it be this nice handoff. And I mentioning Hugo, that was obviously like a tempo for me of what could be done in books and how it can just shatter your expectations of where it can take you. It's like, I love that influence, and it just comes out a different way in your own work. You're like, wow. So what's right for this story then? And it makes you a little braver to go, well, how did he even tackle that? And I've learned over time to forget about time and know this is all very glacial. Like, so a short film that's 6 minutes it took me 3.5 years. With lots of people. I don't know, for if it helps for writers out there that might be listening or parents who want to write books, I think you let go of that completely and you just say what's right for the story. And 10 years, 15 is not to me by any means a tragedy. It's what it takes anyway.
I don't know what it is, but I feel like almost every guest I've had on this year, and I'm so lucky with the guests that come on this show, but they've all said it's taken 9 years, 15 years. Yeah. I mean, the time it took from that seed of the idea and the full gestation of a story to come to this book that we get to hold in our hands as the reader, it's blowing my mind. But I think what you just said, it's so true. We feel this pressure of time, but really, if we can let go of that, there's so much space to create beauty.
It was the biggest lesson for me, one of the big lessons anyway at Pixar, where, Brad Bird would come with The Incredibles, and that was, you talk to the director and find out they've had this idea for 10 years. They're just the work that goes into these things to be thoughtful, and also the feeling that it's a privilege you don't want to waste a reader's time and see the first version of something. And I think from film and animation, where I've had to do many versions till it gets right. Something like WALL-E, we do the performance. It's very much like Buster Keaton vaudeville. You try it. Is it working now? There's rehearsals and screening after screening, years after years. And that's our version. And that even doesn't feel done. It just feels like we had to stop. So it feels like that with Bunns to me, that the story keeps going. I've done the version, but if you said I had another month, I would jump right back in. You just want to give the best version of that story, of what you have to say. The more time you have, it doesn't get bigger. It actually starts to condense and the story gets hopefully more efficient. I guess I love talking about that because it was such a roadblock for me that I put judgment on my writing ability on time. And I never did that with my art. It took forever to learn how to draw, to animate. You have to know anatomy. You have to understand the mechanics of muscles before you even can start moving a character. But for some reason, I felt like when I looked at a different art form, writing, even though I've always tried my whole life, I put this pressure on myself that if I can't write the story from start to finish, it's not, I'm not a writer. And that's a shame. I think that's a real shame that we put that. It's a bit of that fallacy, even as an artist, to say, I did this by myself. Like you're always reacting to another artist around you. One of the first things I do if I'm speaking to students is try to show those parallels of it's the Pet Sounds to Sgt. Pepper. Everybody's reacting to one another. Picasso, Matisse, if you think there's an artist you love, I can bet you anything they're reacting and having this wonderful conversation of someone they might even disagree with, but as a reaction, their work is because of someone else. And I find that very comforting, that I will react to the book Hugo as much as, and then I hope someone will react to mine and say, that's not right. They're saying it wrong. I would say this. That's beautiful movements in art and the art form that keep it propelling forward.
This episode is brought to you by Rakuten. The holidays are here, and that means it's the most wonderful time of the year to save with Rakuten. Use Rakuten to stack cash back at your favorite stores on top of holiday sales. That's savings on savings. With Rakuten, you can get cash back on gifts for everyone on your list, from toys for the kids to kitchen gear for the person who loves to cook to electronics for everyone. You can even save on something for yourself. Cash back is automatically added to your account as you shop. And you can get paid with gift cards, PayPal, or check. Or eligible American Express card members can choose to earn membership rewards points. Join for free today and get a new member bonus after minimum qualifying purchases. Just go to Rakuten.com, download the app, or install the browser extension. Terms and conditions apply.
We all love a legendary comeback, and Degree Original Cool Rush is back and better than ever. Cool Rush isn't just a scent, it's a movement, a fan favorite that delivers bold, fresh vibes and all-day sweat protection. Whether you have a man that spends hours in the gym, heads into the office early, or is just trying to stay fresh on a long day, Cool Rush has their back. Head to your local Walmart or Target and grab Degree Cool Rush, the fan favorite scent from the world's #1 antiperspirant brand.
So the next thing I actually have to say, it kind of follows on from that perfectly. And to sort of set up the question a little bit, I think it was a Vanity Fair article that you're quoted in when Piper had just come out, and how I think John Lasseter, maybe you were in a stuck moment and you really wanted to add some, spoken words, right? But there are no spoken words in the final. And John Lasseter pushed you and said, no, you don't need it. Just keep digging along those lines. My understanding is that you're someone who likes to stay intentionally uncomfortable in your creative process, and you avoid knowing every plot turn or exactly how illustrations should look. So why do you think that not knowing where the story is going as you create it could lead you somewhere better?
Great question. It's a big part of, I think, any type of storytelling, that you are also the reader and the writer at the same time. And you want to have that same excitement. And there's just been too many great examples of a Pixar where I've watched a brilliant director or writer get themselves into a jam and purposely put themselves there and find out a way to get there. And it's one of those moments where you're in the movie or the book and you go, what could happen? And I think that doesn't come from like, I'm so clever, I have this great little twist. It really is, at least for me, I don't know either. I will draw even, I'll put myself in that place where I'll do a sketch that I don't even know how I get to. I just go, if I could get there, wow, where would that take the story? And maybe it leads to a dead end, but I'll learn something on the way. Often it leads to a surprising twist where we all have that clock, where we're reading and there's that act 2 kind of slowness, or in the middle of the book, you're like, okay, where are we? You hadn't at the beginning, but where is this really headed? I really love listening to that voice and going, oh, you're right. You have all these wonderful plans that I had set out. It was going to be a perfect dinner. Everything was all set up, but something has to change right now. We're treading water. And that to me is really exciting, even in the making of the book. There's a rule, I felt like I'm saying too much rules because there really are no rules, but there's a reaction I had when I would see an early screening of a film at Pixar where you would maybe get to read the script of WALL-E early on, or see a first screening, which is very loose storyboards, almost like a comic strip. If I wasn't particularly scared of that idea of like, how would we make that? It's not working. If I didn't have that feeling, it wasn't right. Like to me, I wasn't right for it, or my story that I was writing is not working. Because it means that to me that it's very derivative. There's something about this that you're onto something, but it's not quite there yet. If you're scared, you don't know how to make it, you're in really good shape. So Piper, I had no idea how to finish that film. I came off of WALL-E, and it was and the pantomime type of acting that I wanted to do and the story I wanted to tell. It was going to be a tightrope walk. And even technically, we didn't know how to do it. I just learned to say, to lie and say, I will figure it out, and say, yeah, I know. But we really didn't. And that to me is the beauty of all kind of storytelling and the kind of technology that's associated with CG animation also, or any art form moving forward. Same with books. If there isn't something that is also driving me to push on something, whether it's technical, the structure of this book. Can I mix a graphic novel with a chapter book? What problems will arise? I get sleepy on the idea and I just can't sustain the energy. It was a very long-winded answer. I apologize, but
well, but I think that's the creative path. The creative path to get to something beautiful is long-winded. One of my favorite books on storytelling, the craft of storytelling, is John Truby's The Anatomy of Story. And he's one of the most respected story consultants in the film industry. And the book is really about building compelling narratives for the screen. But as someone who's now working across both mediums, what surprised you most about the difference between writing for the screen versus writing for the page?
I think the difference for me was perhaps when moving more towards literature, I love the structural changes I got to play with, the inner voice, how close I could get to the character. You have to come up with very physical, visual, external things in movies, and the depth. I'll read the book before I ever watch a movie. It'll just hit me so much. There's this lesson there that I love movies and books that allow the reader to bring themselves to the story and allow space for it. And that to me is a huge deal. And that's why I lean when I'm in film towards more pantomime quiet, because I feel like I can't compete with a kind of imagination of the audience and what their experience is going to bring to it. Books teaches me that. It might be strange to say, but I can name short stories, novels that I was reading and influenced my work on certain movies. So which short story I was reading that made me wish I had that type of sparseness, let's say, or strip back my performance in a way that allowed the audience to kind of react. So writing, having that freedom to go and be in the thoughts of Bunns and really spend time, to me, is so rich. It makes books, it might be funny to say, but I felt like I had to work on that many movies and work, even win an Academy Award before I'd even dare write a story. That's how much I revere writing and books and being in a bookstore. So my confidence had to be slowly built to even attempt it, because I think that's the beauty of a novel or short story or poem is hard to compete with. I just feel you can't compete with the person bringing so much of their own life to the story.
Do you see Bunns Rabbit on the screen as well? Is that a goal or a dream for Bunns, or is this purely just in your mind for the page?
I always see things in animation. I would love to see the film version, but they are versions and they are different art forms and they do have to take different turns. So this is the perfect version and the one I wanted to write after Piper people asked me what I wanted to do, and it was Bunns Rabbit, and it was a book. No question. But after that time and the story, it's almost like an artist where you work in oils and then you say, what would that feel like as a watercolor or sculpt? You recognize the difference, but there's an excitement. And, even I did a little book trailer where we're animating it. You can see I'm already animating a rabbit and having some of these moments come to life. There are definitely movie scenes in my brain, but I've always had that, that's back to reading your first picture book and going, oh, there it is. There's that part of it that I can't shut off.
Yeah. Well, I was on your Instagram feed earlier today, and I just, even the sort of the butterfly animation from you that you've pulled from the book was so beautiful. So I do have to ask, on behalf of my own writer heart, but also any of our writer friends that are listening who do have dreams of seeing their books on the screen. And I think it's important for everybody to dream, and there's no one way to get somewhere specific, but what advice do you have for anybody? And even young readers who, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an amazing movie star, right? Like so many yes, kids.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for people that maybe want to see their characters be on a screen, whether it's a TV screen or a big giant cinematic screen?
Yeah, it's the life of an artist to look at different mediums and go, how would that work if I was to sculpt that and bring myself to that medium, to writing, it's really fulfilling in how that shapes you. Even if it could, one hand, it could look like a goal that, and if you didn't make it into a movie, it would be a success. But I think we'd be missing the point of how much you'd get out of that experience of trying to do a little animation yourself. Or what if I wrote it as a screenplay? To me, they're all beautiful experiences where then I take forward and it might move me in a direction, just like we talk about in a story that you're writing, your own life, where you go, I never ever thought I would move in that direction. So I don't like being pigeonholed. I don't like saying I can only be an animator. That means you can only write for movies, and that means you can only write for books. And, my next book will be a picture book. And I have this part of me that just wants to try things. I would love to write a stage play, and I would love to write an adult novel. I don't love getting caught up in the marketing, especially when we talk about how slow this stuff moves. You hear me say 10 years, then I'm not one chasing what's popular this week. I'm trying to chase what I'm after, what I'm trying to say, and get better at that. So I would say if you wanted to make your book a movie, think on that and look at how movies are constructed. And maybe that'll also influence how you're writing your own stories. Maybe you'll get that chance. I write screenplays and they don't see the time. It doesn't bother me that I might do a version of Bunns and have scenes blocked out in my head and written a script that doesn't get made. It feels all like the right thing to do.
I think it goes back to listening to your heart song, right?
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Yeah. So Bunns Rabbit does beautifully, like we talked about before, fill that gap of kids progressing from picture books to chapter books. So I've said it before on this show that zone of a child's reading is just so integral in helping them continue to find the joy of reading so we don't lose them forever. And I love that the format of this book, which you mentioned already, is that mix of prose. It's got graphic novel elements and like the heavy illustrations. And to me, it was so wonderful to hear you say that you were working simultaneously on the art and the story, because I just want to say, as a reader and somebody who sort of dissects stories often in my head, I was looking at this and I was thinking, wow, the flow of this is so incredible, because often there'll be some spot art in an illustrated book,
Yes.
and so they're just kind of selecting where can we have a break in the page and can you give us some art for this? But I was thinking to myself, this was so incredibly done. So just in a nutshell, just tell us a little bit more about that process of when you would decide to create a piece of art, when you would decide it would be panels, just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, being naive to how books are made is sometimes a valuable asset into going into this. I went in not having a lot of background into how that's done and the strictness of why that's done. So I went in with my instincts of, well, I obviously draw and write, and I'll be editing both at the same time and trying to find the best way to express, let's say, this page or this chapter. Traditionally, you would be in a place where there'd be a piece of artwork and so much space for the writing would already be locked down. And I would say, I think I need to make more space for this drawing. I love the dance of going back and forth and which one has more important. And that does mean that the prose are not above the illustrations and there's no hierarchy here. And that comes from film, sharing a scene with acting. And there's a very specific thing that happened at Pixar that I think might be valuable to like why I landed in this position. Traditionally in films, you'd be cast a specific character. So you would just play Woody and you just play Buzz. And a lot of the times you can start upstaging each other because one's acting on the left side of the screen, the right, and it becomes this very loud, big thing. And that is like the worst thing you could ever do. Where I was kind of working at Pixar, which was the same animator would animate Buzz and Woody. And you have this very nice balance of going back and forth. Who are we paying attention? You watch Buzz move and he'll say something with Woody. And that dance to me is what I'm bringing, I think, to the book, where I want to have them feel that. What it meant practically was a ton of revisions, hundreds and maybe thousands of drawings thrown away. That's what I'm used to in animation. So why wouldn't I be used to it in this? So it was tiring to say, okay, once we put the book up with the art director, we have some flow problems and let's deconstruct this. But that's exactly what we did. And that's what a good art director tells you. Just like an editor in a movie, you can't see it quite yet. But when Anne and Haley say, oh, this is a little slow here. And then I said, okay, I'm going to come back to you with condensed chapters and a new flow and new illustrations. And those are so valuable when you have those first. That team is so critical. The idea that you do that alone, a lot of the times when I'm working, I feel like I'm turning over an hourglass and I'm going to go blind by the time that hourglass goes. And I won't be able to see things as fresh. It's partly why I work on different stories at the same time, because I want to be able to stop on one and jump onto the next and try to come back to it with fresh eyes, which again, time is your friend. If you wait a little bit, it could help you.
Yeah, I'm really seeing this theme right now in our conversation of time. When we have peace with time, things tend to progress. But when we put the pressure of time, we can also start to feel more precious over our words and the artwork. And so I'm loving hearing from you on how you're so comfortable with tossing away what's not working rather than being focused on the amount of time and effort you already put into those, because that time and effort that you put into those is actually what leads you to creating what's right.
Well said. Well said. And in a much more condensed way. Thank you. I think that's exactly right. Animators, I mean, Chuck Jones, the famous Warner Brothers animator, so as soon as you start school, I remember our teacher sat us down and said, his quote, paraphrase, but it's something like, yeah, everybody has 100,000 bad drawings in front of them first that they have to kind of get rid of before they can do the one drawing. And it just puts it right to me from day one of where you're starting. Get those 100,000 drawings out. If you say, it's the best saying, if you think your first drawing is important, that's crazy. And why not bring that to writing? I love sketchbooks because they're real journals. Too often the Instagram world presents artists as like, here's more, would you like to see all my perfect drawings? And which is really unfair to young artists who are starting out, because it's not true. They should be you and your journal, and it's a diary of all your thoughts and scribbles and mistakes. And I look at a Degas sketchbook and look how many times he redraws the hand. And I love looking at books that show the editing of a writer and the first loose drawings in like a Paris Review, that they show how much we correct and go over it. That's the truth. To me, that's the truth of it, versus presenting it as like, I just did this book. It's really easy. And I draw Bunns and then I write what I write. Absolutely not. Throw chapters out, take wrong turns. That's the wonderful journey.
Yes. Well, so then when we have the finished book and all of that time and effort that's gone into it, like from this particular book, Bunns Rabbit, what is a highlight for you? Is there something that you feel the most attached to? And I'm curious if it ends up being a piece of art or if it's some prose.
You know, there are little moments where you feel like, maybe Bunns meeting B, or these little moments that you feel like, I think I landed in the right spot where what I was trying to say feels the most true, that kind of seeded the idea. Or I do love in the story where no adult is really trustworthy in the sense of they all have their own beliefs. They all have their own superstitions. They feel certain ways. And it's up to you as a young character, hero, heroine in the story, Bunns, to go, who's right? Who's wrong? It feels true to me. But then there's this other layer, because you've worked on something for so many years, that I feel does resonate, which is your personal experiences are in there. So the drawings are sketches that I've done at my son's baseball game in the tree. There's very rarely am I imagining something. I'm more of remembering the moment that this little island that I would swim to as a kid, this rabbit that's in my yard, the bird that flew by, that I try to put as much specificity. And sometimes that's very literally sitting down. My daughter's drawing, she's drawing a monarch, I'm drawing a monarch. And those drawings are filled through years in my sketchbook. So it becomes very personal. Might look like a hillside to everybody, and that's exactly what you want. But that's walking in Bodega Bay, where I've shot, a lot of Piper, doing live action reference, but also the shell that the crab in Piper runs into, the hermit crab. That shell my daughter found on the beach, and we took photos and we put it back in the ocean, and that has this special meaning that I do feel transcends, and you just kind of feel in the story that if everybody puts your personal touches in it, somehow the reader and the audience feel that in a different way.
I just want to share quickly what my favorite illustration is, because it just really felt really striking to me, because as somebody who doesn't illustrate or draw or create, visual art, I always have this fascination of how clever it is when an artist can create something that's so dark and also bright and glows at the same time. And so I love the illustration when the fox is just looking straight, at the reader with this very dark background and the glow of the grass underneath the fox. And it's so beautiful to me. And I just find it so clever when artists can pull off something that's so dark and so light, but that it also has kind of hazy, blurry, smudged edges. Like it isn't just like a dark line next to a white line, Anyway, That's my favorite.
I do like that one too. And it's fun to play with, and the publisher, a lot of credit to be able to pull that off, those darks and those contrasts. And there's something in film called a color script, and I still do it for books, which is colors through the chapters and just what colors strike you. So there's this own storyline of just emotionally where it's taking you, just so you zoom out and you go, well, that feels like the story. And much in the same way, I'll listen to like only a few certain songs that feel like they put me in this tone of writing. I don't know. I appreciate that you like that drawing too. I do as well. A lot of the times I just want to correct everything I'm seeing. So I see the mistakes. So I won't tell you all the mistakes I see in that drawing that I want to redo. I'll just say, thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, okay. So how do we talk about the book's ending without giving away the ending? So without spoilers, I'm just so curious if you can tell us where Bunns' heartsong is leading her. And more importantly, what is your heartsong telling you these days? So where is this journey leading you as a creator? What are we going to see next from Bunns?
Well, if the first book, without giving it away as well, there's a lot of what we call in film Easter eggs for what's planted in the first book is actually a lot of payoff in the second, meaning you'll be able to hop back and go, that character was in the illustration of that's going to show up and be a big part of the second book. But as far as her heartsong, what the story's about, I think the first book is about belonging and finding your place in the world. I love stories where you find a place in the world versus just simply like a story about conquering it and this kind of like solo mission. But where do I belong in the greater world? And then as we leave the meadow, Bunns is going to enter that world. And then she's going to have to take that next step, which to me matches a young reader's journey, which is, where am I in my own family? But then where am I as a citizen of the world? And then what do I do with that ability and that knowledge? So Bunns is going to face that in the second book in a big, big way. That's what I can say at this point.
I'm excited. So on that note, if Bunns could give one piece of advice to a kid who feels like the bad omen in their own warren, whether it's because they look different, they think differently, or just don't fit the mold, what do you think Bunns would say to them?
I think Bunns would ask you to be true to yourself, and that she would remind you that everyone feels that way. And that's what she recognizes. And there isn't a single character in the story, she might point out, that doesn't feel this way, that doesn't feel a little different and either is overprotective about that difference or overcompensating or it's a very human feeling. And we can all be empathetic to one another, knowing that. I think Bunns would lean on that and be really supportive and probably snuggle up in you and do some very cute bunny stuff at the same time.
Gosh, I'm such a crier. So you're making my eyes water. That was such a great answer. I love that. I love
Thanks.
that. Well, Alan, thank you so much for sharing not just the story of Bunns Rabbit, but your own journey as a creator with us today. I hope young readers everywhere discover Bunns and say, look how thick this book is. I read it all on my own. And I hope they learn what Bunns teaches us, that being different isn't a bad omen. It's often the beginning of something extraordinary. So thank you for being here.
Real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us on this quest for growing readers. Alan's reminder that we all struggle with belonging and that our vulnerability is actually what connects us. I think that's something we all needed to hear today. If you'd like to learn more about Alan Barillaro and his work, you can find links to his website in the show notes, along with links to order Bunns Rabbit. Trust me, this is a book that deserves a place on your shelf, whether you're looking for that perfect bridge between picture books and chapter books, or you simply want to experience a story where being different truly is the beginning of something extraordinary. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review. Every review helps other book-loving families find the Growing Readers podcast. Until next time, keep following your heartsong, even when you don't know exactly where it's leading you. The Growing Readers podcast is a production of the Children's Book Review. For more heartfelt and gorgeous books like Alan Barillaro's Bunns Rabbit, I hope you'll visit us at thechildrensbookreview.com.